Again, everybody, it's Kevin Knessa coming to you from the newsroom of The Observer and TheObserver.com on this, the 17th day of April in the year 2024. And joining me today is Reed Anfinson. He is the owner and publisher of numerous weekly newspapers in the state of Minnesota, and he is the former president of the National Newspaper Association, an association we were once a part of, no longer, but we were. Reed wrote a column recently about the dying industry in newspapers, and we saw it on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago. And he has been gracious enough to allow us to speak with him today about the industry and his experiences. And he joins us today from Minnesota. Reed, thank you so much for doing this.
It's my pleasure.
Right. You tell us a little bit about your own background. I know you own a few newspapers, but if you could let us know where these papers are and how long you've owned them and how long you've been in the industry.
The newspapers we have, if you can picture the western part of Minnesota where the hump kind of comes out on the western side into the Dakotas, I'm out towards that area. And I have three county seat newspapers uh, that are contiguous counties. Small towns, agricultural towns, Benson and Grant and the our Grant County Herald, Elbow Lake paper are kind of similar in some ways. Morris, which is 24 miles away, also has the University of Minnesota Morris campus, a small campus of about 1,200 students today. Uh, and so it's a different dynamic in that community a little bit. But we're primary a farm area, uh, and in two of the counties, we are pretty much the main newspaper. Only in one county, Grant County, it's the only newspaper. And but the county seat newspapers play an important role in their communities um, because of their population base and their governments.
You
And
also,
then I'm a
sorry,
graduate of the School of Journalism at I'm a graduate of the School of Journalism at the University of Minnesota. Uh, Worked for a session for the Minnesota House, and then returned to a family newspaper that was owned by my father and a partner. And I ended up buying them out in 1990, uh, and have expanded a little bit in the last 10 years with the two other newspapers.
we have a similar situation. Our owner got their newspaper. Her dad owned it as well, and it's been in her family since 1972. The paper's been around for 136 years. As we were talking before we came on the air that the desk behind you was the 50th anniversary, correct? In 1936 of the paper where you are.
1936.
Right.
There's a picture of the editor sitting at that desk with an old phone and an old light that I'd love to replicate and have sitting on that desk.
That's incredible. What a piece of history. You also were the president of the National Newspaper Association. Could you tell us a little bit about your involvement with that organization?
I've spent almost the last more than 20 years on either the National Newspaper Association board or the foundation board, serving as president of both organizations. I currently serve on back on the national board with the caveat that I will not serve in an executive position again. It's the people who serve as president of the association. It's an incredible job. It takes you all over the country, speaking to state associations and groups, and makes you a national spokesperson for the newspaper industry, the community newspaper industry in America. And when I knew I was moving after 6 years as a regional representative representing Minnesota, North and South Dakota, and Wisconsin, I moved into the executive chairs. And when I agreed to do that, I began, I put in a ton of Google searches on community newspapers and what was happening to them. And I never wanted to be on a national stage and look ignorant about community newspapers. And I've never, over the last 20 years, I've kept that up to keep aware and educate myself as much as possible on how essential newspapers are. The print newspaper in many areas is to democracy, a representative democracy. Um, it was an incredible experience simply because of the number of people I got to meet, my colleagues around the country, and their perspectives.
It must have been very time consuming, though, right? I mean, when you're juggling other your own newspapers and you have to deal with this with a national organization, I can't imagine it kept you home very often, did it?
Well, I was home a lot, but today I have no idea how I did the job. I have no idea how. I know of at least one past president who had a heart attack
Oh my God.
because because of the job stress and trying to keep all those balls in the air. Um, but it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life.
That's tremendous. If you're just joining us, Reed Anfinson is the former president of the National Newspaper Association, and he owns three newspapers in the state of Minnesota. And he's joining us today to talk about the state of the industry. And one of the things that struck me the most about your column was that we're mentioning is that the tangible newspaper is a reminder that the community where you are located is still alive and well, and that there's going to be significant news there. Tell us why it's so important for that physical, tangible newspaper to still exist in 2024 and why it's not happening in so many communities.
Well, I say there are five fundamental reasons why a community newspaper is very important to its community. The first one is trust. Survey after survey shows that there's no media that is more trusted than the local community newspaper, uh, because I walk around the corner in the grocery store and there's somebody I just wrote about, and they get immediate feedback.
Right.
Uh, and I think it's that closeness that we have with our communities and the ability for that feedback, that we have that trust. Uh, and the second thing is, through time, in the past, we had the financial strength to challenge power when they would withhold information or say that a meeting could be closed. We could afford the attorneys to go to court and say, no, you can't. That's been substantially weakened, but a citizen on their own does not have that financial wherewithal or interest in challenging power. The third thing that's extremely important to newspapers and longevity of newspapers is, in Minnesota, we have something called the Open Meeting Law and the Data Practices Act. Both are laws that guarantee access to information and laws that guarantee public access to public meetings. Citizens don't know this. I've seen citizens peek their head in the door and say, can I come in? And we know that if the public body is sitting there alone and they're discussing something sensitive, they might say, can you just wait? Give us 10 minutes. So it's that local knowledge, not that local knowledge, but that knowledge of our rights.
Right.
The fourth thing is we show up. We're at meeting after meeting, month after month, year after year. We know the subjects. We remind voters of the right things and the wrong things the public officials did when they go to the polls. But it's that constantly showing up and reminding the public of what's happening in our communities that's so important. But finally, I think perhaps the most important thing we have today is that physical product, the print product that sits there on the counters around the community, in the libraries, in the schools, in businesses, waiting rooms. And that headline is always saying to people, don't forget about your community and what's happening in it.
Mm.
If I'm only online, uh, that my presence is fragmented. I might think, oh gosh, I better get back to that story I was reading about a couple of weeks ago. All of a sudden, a month's gone by and you forgot about the story. There are incidents across the country. In Washington State, a public park was sold that without presence is community knowledge to a developer who was going to put up Washington apartment buildings State, because nobody was covering the meetings. Was sold. And when they listed the sale on the agenda, it was just a parcel number. It didn't say it was this park, community park. It said parcel number XXXX, discussion for sale. And that's the way it was sold. Uh, if you've heard of the story of Bell, California, where the uh, the citizens suspected something was wrong,
Right.
hundreds of thousands of dollars was increases in taxes, and they went to their local government and said, "What's going on? What are we paying for?" And they said, "Well, that's private information."
Huh.
Well,
Well,
after constant frustration, the LA Times came in and said, "We want this information." And they said no. And they said, "Well, we'll be back tomorrow with our attorneys." An example of newspapers paying to get information. What they found out is the city manager was being paid, I think, $500,000. So was the chief of police. So were members of the council. A few of those people are serving in jail now. But there are cases like this across the country where, when there isn't a reporter to be able to challenge local government, bad things start to happen.
my goodness. I think I was reading too that one of your own reporters had a similar situation recently where she was not granted access to a council chamber. Could you tell us a little bit about that, or am I misspeaking? I'm not.
Well, we had a we had a case where my reporter showed up at the meeting, and a new reporter, and at the city council meeting, and they said, "Who are you?" And he introduced himself and who he worked for, and the mayor told him, "Well, we don't want you here."
Oh God.
And uh, and we have had a couple incidences like that, and these are very small towns that we go into, but "We don't want you here" could become a thing of the past because there won't be anybody there. They
Right.
won't have to tell anybody they don't want us there. The other thing is people will argue that, well, we'll check in online on the meeting. My school district through the pandemic had an online version. You could check into the school board meetings via Zoom or other programs. They carried that into the start of this year and then discontinued it after nobody ever showed up online. Instead
Mm.
of going through the hassle of setting up that access, they just discontinued it.
Wow.
Same thing happens at the city council meetings. I cover city, county, school, hospital meetings in the past, county board. At 95% of the meetings, I'm the only citizen in the room. Nobody else is there unless they have a personal item they want to be on the agenda for.
Right.
But they might be there for a discussion of whether or not the city should allow backyard chickens, but they won't be there for a $5 million bond issue.
It's unbelievable that that's still happening too. I think we're in a little better situation where we have maybe about 12 people who come to meetings on a regular basis, and some of them are extremely loud in what they do. But for the most part, the fact that they are so uninformed is a detriment. And it's funny you bring up Zoom because this happened to me just yesterday. The We had a council meeting in our town of Kearney just yesterday, last night. 7 people were being promoted, so there were hundreds of people who came, and it was so packed that the meeting they had to keep people from getting in because it would have been over capacity for fire purposes. And the reason they were able to keep everybody outside and not move it to another location was that the meeting was on Zoom. But unfortunately, everybody who spoke at the meeting, nobody would hold the microphone. So none of the information that was being discussed got out at this Zoom meeting. And there were literally hundreds of people who couldn't hear a word about what was going on. And we even told them, like, you've got to they've got to hold the microphones if you want to hear this. And nobody did a thing about it. So it's a very delicate balance. I understand. We face it quite a bit with technology, but again, we're not there. Nobody knows about what's going on, and sometimes it's frustrating to know that there's could be a day when we're not there, and I hope that day doesn't come anytime soon.
Well, we have a situation right now with the state legislature where they're trying to remove public notice, the requirement for school districts to put public notice in newspapers.
Right.
My response to that is if your school district wants to do a special levy to build a new building for education or to support education, who's going to tell that story of what is the reasoning behind the need for the levy? Uh, if the newspaper is gone, there's only two ways the message will get out. The school district's message will be they'll promote it, and the opposition will promote their side. Who's going to take the story of the two sides and put them together and say, here are the two sides, and here's where they vary, but here's the fundamentals of it for you to understand as a voter is what's right, and whether or not you should vote for or against this. Without the newspaper, it's not just the city levy, I mean, the school district levy that'll go away. Any bonding project done by a city or a county or any local unit of government, who's going to tell that story to the voters? Uh,
Right.
it's gone.
Right. Gone completely. I'd like to ask you a question that's somewhat personal, but I think you may have faced this yourself too. We have been up against quite a bit where social media is looked upon by so many people as the be all and end all when it comes to making announcements and getting information out. Are you finding it difficult with some communities, some towns, or organizations that they have this over reliance on social media and they often forget that, hey, we're still here, You should be bringing this information to us or allowing us to grab this information, but they're just relying too much on social media and the internet.
I was at a community economic development meeting last month, and they have established a program to help finance. We need housing badly. Most communities do. So we have a number of what they call infill lots in the community, places in a block that a house was removed or there was a fire or it was old and it was torn down, leaving a blank spot. And so we're trying to create a program to fill those spots in and to maybe give people a incentive for doing it. And at the economic development meeting, the person in charge of that was asked,
It was
"Well, how's that
old and it was
going? Have
torn
you had a
down,
lot of
leaving.
responses?" And she said, "No, we don't have any responses yet." And they asked, "Well, where are you promoting it?" And she said, "Facebook."
Huh.
And the members of the public body, there's 7 of them, 2 council members and 5 citizens appointed. 5 of them said right out, "Well, we don't use Facebook. We don't go to Facebook looking for that kind of information. Why aren't you using the newspaper?"
Right.
Uh, and so that's just a little story about how people think social media reaches the community. It doesn't. It reaches their circle of friends.
Right.
Uh, one of my favorite quotes also comes from a city council meeting. Uh, I'm sitting at the back of the room, and there's 7 rows of empty chairs in front of me, and we're doing a Zoom meeting with a consultant from the Twin Cities, 130 miles away. And the city manager introduces the council, the staff, and then said, and representing the people of the community, the newspaper.
Wow.
And he said my name. And that gave me a little bit of a chill because it was the truth. Uh, and it was a recognition by the city council that uh, the newspaper was essential to the community.
That's right. We're still here and we're covering everything you say, so be careful. We're just yes, Reed Anfinson is with us today from Minnesota. And I know you have encouraged people to write to their government representatives, whether it's locally, you in Minnesota, us in New Jersey, or in Washington, D.C. Can you tell me about what you have done personally with the state government in Minnesota and or in national realm in D.C. to help keep newspapers alive?
We're at the national level. We're extraordinarily frustrated with Congress. Everybody knows how dysfunctional Congress has become. Uh, we're not. We're just not getting anything through Congress, even though many people recognize how important community newspapers are. So states are now turning to their newspapers are turning to their state legislators, trying to get information through. And we plan on approaching our uh, legislature in the 2025 session with a bill to help community newspapers. We have an ally in our governor, and Governor Walz. A year ago at our newspaper association convention, he spoke. And his kind of surprising thing is he gets done speaking and he asks for any questions. And it's a room full of newspaper people, and everybody sits there quietly. And so I got up and I asked him, I explained the challenges we faced as newspapers. And I said, "Are you willing to support legislation for newspapers?" And he said, "Bring me something."
Wow.
And so that's our job in 2025, is to bring him something and bring the legislature something to support community newspapers. It's not just supporting us. For example, if they would have a tax break for our reporters, the reporters we hire, if we could get a break on our income taxes, and that would help to support community journalism. The real big thing we need today, as well, is we need young people to see that there's a future in buying a community newspaper, that they can amortize that debt over time and pay it off and make a decent family living. Uh, we don't have that right now. I got a call from a newspaper publisher in Minnesota who was 80 years old. And he said, I'm trying to sell my newspaper and I can't find a buyer. I can't do this anymore, he said. But he was just desperate and crushed by the fact that he might have to close his newspaper because he couldn't find a buyer. If we had something in place, I mean, you look at the farm programs in America, They have beginning farmer programs. What about beginning publisher programs? Isn't a community newspaper worth one farmer? I
Mm,
mean, the subsidy one farmer gets, isn't it the community newspaper worth at least that?
you got that.
Uh, and so we need to have a future for newspapers. We need to see that income stream that allows it to be sold to somebody local, somebody to become part of the community, rather than a national chain with 130 newspapers like Alden that can just close them down and walk away without a second thought.
And
Uh,
that is what we're constantly seeing in this state. The big chains are taking them, and then they're shutting them down right away, and it just seems like there's no solution. But which leads me to my next question, though. Do you have do you sense that when you bring this to the governor in Minnesota that you're going to find support with him? Will you find support with the other bodies in the state legislature? Do you suspect that this is actually going to turn into something, or do you think it's going to be a challenge?
I hate to be overly optimistic. We know that our legislators support community journalism. One of the challenges we face is that, like many states, rural Minnesota has turned Republican. Uh, and so, out of the 87 counties in Minnesota, the 7 county metro area represents about 56% of the state's population. It has more members of the House and Senate than the other uh, 80 counties in Minnesota. And so our local legislators, whether they're Republican or Democrat, support their community newspaper. The metropolitan Twin Cities area, with over 3 million people, 3.5 million people, don't have that sense of community or that sense of community newspaper like we do in rural Minnesota. So we've got the governor on our side. I think we have our Republican legislators on our side because they know the value of community newspapers. But it's getting some of those metro legislators who don't have that connection. Their community newspaper is the Star Tribune or the Pioneer Press. It's not quite the same as being the Swift County Monitor in Benson, Minnesota.
Right. Wow.
Uh,
So you're
and
finding
so
really the
I'm hoping.
Republicans being more more backing this more.
No, I don't know that there's Republican or Democratic differences right now.
Okay.
Uh, it could be more of a metropolitan versus rural issue.
Uh,
We will see. But I am hopeful that especially in the suburbs of the Twin Cities, where they have been devastated by the loss of newspapers, that those legislators would also be very supportive of legislation to help community newspapers. It's a drop in the bucket. Uh, I think the other place that we have fallen down, and this is federal legislation.
Right.
At the founding of the country, Madison and Jefferson and the other founders knew that to have a legitimate representative democracy, we needed an informed electorate. So newspapers were given basically free postage and public notice advertising. Uh, then in the 1840s, 50s, 60s comes along, and advertising really takes off and supplements that free postal almost and public advertising. Well, by the 1990s, the postal rates are skyrocketing. The public notice is being withdrawn. 2000s come along, the internet is here, devastates newspaper advertising, and at the same time, public notice advertising has been decimated, and postal rates have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
So that public notice advertising and the postal subsidies were the fundamental recognition that government had a role to play in an informed electorate, and that's where we are today. We need to restore that knowledge that and the trust in the fact that the government can play a role here without damaging my independence as a journalist. I'm far more afraid of writing a controversial piece on Trump than I am, and what happens to me from my advertisers and subscribers than I am the government. I wrote an editorial at the last election
Right.
listing, just comparing things, saying basically, if you believe that climate change is caused by human beings and our activity, you'll probably vote Democratic. If you think it's just a natural cycle, you probably vote Republican. If you believe that a woman's right to choose is a fundamental right, or that life is sacred at any point, I mean, you'll vote Democrat in one, Republican in the other.
Right.
Simply based on that editorial, I was thought to be too liberal because they thought I was demeaning one side and promoting the other. I lost a big advertiser for a year
Wow.
just by trying to portray things that way. I know that if I read an editorial today that criticizes Trump, I will lose subscribers and advertisers. Or if I say that the elections were free, that 61 cases were brought in courts, and that 60 cases they were overturned, and the one that it wasn't was a procedural motion that was turned down, I'll lose advertisers. I'll lose subscribers.
Does that cause you to think twice before you write editorials of that nature? Because it has for us. I can be very frank
Absolutely,
and say it has.
absolutely. And for somebody uh, who has won editorial writing awards, and last year I was given the Eugene Survey Award from the International Society of Weekly Newspaper Editors.
Yes.
It's gut wrenching. I mean, I get cartoons that I look at 3 or 4 a week, and I decide which ones I'm going to publish. And I know which one of my gut tells me let's publish this one. On the other hand, my financial side says I've got debts to pay. At the
Right.
other two newspapers, they're not paid off. The payments are substantial. Uh, can I lose that? I mean, can I lose those subscribers and advertisers without closing the doors and keeping my staff employed? It's gut wrenching, but that's where we are today. Uh, we need that financial security, not just to bring the next generation of journalists on board and newspaper owners, but to have the courage to say what needs to be said.
Do you think we might ever see a day where the federal government might intervene and bring back the days where postage was subsidized and things of that nature that might make it easier, or is that just an absolute pipe dream?
You know, I'm an optimist for the most part, but pessimism is creeping in. I've got two fantastic U.S. senators, and Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar. They're great supporters of community newspapers, but they're only two members of the U.S. Senate. Uh, my U.S. rep would be supportive of community newspapers. The seventh congressional district, where I live, uh, at one time had more community newspapers than any other congressional district in the country.
Wow.
Uh, the only one that beat us was South Dakota, and they have one U.S. rep. And so it we have a lot of community newspapers still in rural Minnesota. Uh, so whether Republican or Democrat, I know we'd be supported in Minnesota. But we have it doesn't take much to stall things in Congress,
Yeah.
especially in the Senate, where it takes a 60 vote majority sometimes to get anything through. Um, so we're working with both. We've got our associations have both good supporters on Republican side and the Democratic side, and both of us are working energetically uh, in that for that purpose. Because 2 weeks ago I carried a letter to the editor of a person who blasted the Republicans. This week I carried one that said Trump is the best thing ever to happen to America. And I was even asked by somebody, "Are you going to run this letter to the editor that's against Trump?" I said, "Absolutely.
Absolutely.
That's our
Yeah.
job. Uh, it, everybody's opinion matters, and it's the own carrying cartoons and editorials and letters to the editor that disagree with you are the way to show the makeup of the community. Here's what the voices in the community are thinking and saying, and we need to have that representation as a mirror to the community of who we are."
Reed, you know what some of my favorite letters are? The ones that tear me to shreds and tear my boss to shreds. I look forward to them. I really do. And it sounds like you would too, because it really does demonstrate, hey, listen, we realize that we have to do this, but that's the way we're going to do it. If you're just joining me, Reed Anfinson is with us. And Reed, I'm sorry, I think I cut you off just there.
Nope, no, that's fine. It's educational sometimes. When the Star Tribune carried the column I wrote,
Mhm.
uh, that you published as well,
Right.
I went and there were 131 or 32 comments at the time on it. And so I took a deep breath and started reading all the comments. Some are out of left field, some out of right field, some are thoughtful. Some show that people simply don't understand rural community journalism.
Yeah.
Uh, some people are saying, why don't you go buy those newspapers that were closed down if you're so concerned about them? Some people say it's the fault of newspapers that they're too liberal, or they don't understand people anymore. And I'm basically saying to them, and I didn't respond to any of them, but you don't understand small town community journalism. With a lot of the comments I heard, just fundamentally, they're Twin Cities metro people that don't understand small town community journalism. So,
Unbelievable.
but it's educational for me to read what people have to say.
Oh yeah, it's entertaining too at some time. That's for sure.
Some of it, yes.
Right? On our way out here, and again, I cannot thank you enough for doing this, Reed. Maybe tell us a little bit about what you see 5 years from now. Will we still be here? Will we be able to have a reunion 5 years from now and say, "Wow, things have gotten so much better"? Or do you think you and I will have different career paths maybe 5 years from now?
Well, I won't have a different career path. I don't think, because I'll be at that point. I'm already collecting Social Security. I mean, if it wasn't for the fact that I was collecting Social Security, I don't know if I could keep some of the operations going,
My
because
God.
I've reduced my pay substantially because of that, and so I can pay my staff. Uh,
Yep.
and plus that being my medical costs have significantly been subsidized now through Medicare. If I didn't have those advantages over some publishers, and that's what far too many publishers in America are in that boat right now, collecting Social Security, getting Medicare to support their operations and hire new people to help them out. Uh, but I want to be optimistic that the people will recognize they need their community newspapers. In Hutchinson, which is a good sized town where the newspaper was closed, when that announcement was made, 60 people in the community, business leaders and community people, got together uh, to talk about what do we do next? What do we do? And there's already people talking about starting another newspaper in that city, in that county, if Alden is gone. So that's encouraging. It shows that citizens, see value in their community newspaper and want it to keep going. I think we have to have. I know the Minnesota Farm Bureau and the Minnesota Farmers Union both had days on the Hill in St. Paul to meet with legislators. We need to do something like that. As I said, we need to get loud and visible to the public with our message.
And we've got to be the ones to do it. People like you,
Absolutely.
our ownership, boy, remarkable. Reed, this was an absolute honor and a privilege for me, and I cannot thank you enough. And I hope maybe we could do this again sometime down the road, but hopefully under much better circumstances. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak passionately about community newspapers.
It's my honor. Thank you, Reed.
Thank
Well,
you.
sign
We'll
off.
see you.
See you soon.
Yep. Goodbye.
Okay.
Yep. Bye.